You're listening to a podcast by Great Kids. To learn more about us, visit our website at greatkidsinc.org.
This is Different Eyes, the view from the heart of another, a Great Kids podcast about overcoming bias in others and in ourselves. We'll be talking about how we can learn to see what others see, and vice versa, helping others see what we see. Our discussions will revolve around bias, cognitive bias and implicit bias, and how this all relates to the work that you do to support families. Looking back over the past year has proven interesting in so many ways. One day, our reflections evolved into a discussion of cognitive bias and all the ways that this affects decision-making, ours and everyone else's, without us even realizing it. The conversation got interesting enough that it sparked the idea for this podcast. We hope that by beginning to look through the eyes of others and also helping them to see what we see, we might all start to see things that maybe without each other's help, we never would have noticed. Hi everybody, welcome. This is episode number 7. So we are officially starting the second half of our podcast series on cognitive bias. As always, Shauna Donaldson, the Great Kids CEO, is here to help me explore another cognitive bias. Today we'll be talking about the empathy gap.
And as you recall from previous discussions, cognitive bias is a systematic error in thinking that happens due to our brain's need to simplify information so we can process it quickly.
Yeah, quickly processing information is all about survival. But sometimes this comes with a downside, one which can lead to errors in decision-making that negatively impact our lives and the lives of others. We all do it, and that's an important thing to remember.
We've been discussing the fact that our brains make inaccurate evaluations of both ourselves and others. And as you listen in, we can think about how we can all begin to see through the eyes of others and understand how they've come to the conclusions they have about the world around them.
Yeah. As you know, at Great Kids, we spend a lot of time talking about empathy. We even have a daily do called e-parenting, which is short for empathic parenting. So today we'll be talking about a cognitive bias that is very specific to empathy.
Yeah, the term empathy is used to describe a wide range of experiences. Emotion researchers, which I love, right? Thinking that people actually research emotion. It's
What a
a
great
wonderful
job, right?
thing,
What a great job.
right? Yeah. So emotion researchers generally define empathy as the ability to sense other people's emotions, coupled with the ability to imagine what someone else might be thinking or feeling.
Yeah, it's interesting, Shauna. There are really two parts to that definition of empathy. And researchers often differentiate between the two types of empathy. So there's emotional empathy, which refers to those sensations and feelings that we get in response to other people's emotions. That can include things like mirroring what that person is feeling or just feeling stressed when we detect somebody else's fear or anxiety. And then there's also cognitive empathy, which is slightly more than that. It refers really more to our ability to identify and understand other people's emotions.
I find this to be such a fascinating conversation, Dana, and the separation of empathy. It was something that I really had not thought about.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the empathy gap because it sounds like a problem, right? So if you can tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so the empathy gap is a cognitive bias that causes us to struggle to understand mental states that are different from our own present state. So essentially, the empathy gap means that when people are in a certain mental state, let's say happy, they struggle to understand the perspective of or predict the actions of somebody who's, say, angry, whether that person is their future self or somebody else.
Mm-hmm. You said something very interesting there at the end. their future self, or someone else. So we can struggle to empathize with other people, but we also struggle to empathize with our future self. So for example, if a person is currently feeling calm, the empathy gap can cause them to struggle to predict how they will act when they're angry. And I had not thought about that before.
Right. So we always think about empathy with other people, but we really have to focus in a little bit on this idea of empathy with our future self or our other self. So I think of the example if someone is trying to lose weight, and right now, say for example, they're full, right? They just ate a whole bunch of snack foods or something, right? The empathy gap can cause them to overestimate how well they'll be able to handle the temptation to eat junk food later when they're hungry. So if I just ate a bunch of junk food, I can go, hey, you know what? I'm never doing this again. I'm not going to do this again. Well, that was full me, right? Hungry me is going to have a different opinion about it. So there are a couple of different kinds of empathy gaps that we have to kind of be mindful of as we have this conversation. This one that we're talking about right now is the intrapersonal empathy gap, when we struggle to think about our own thoughts, emotions, or behaviors. So intrapersonal is when it's us not being able to empathize with ourselves, our future selves, or our different self.
That's a fantastic example to losing weight, because I dare say many of us have been there, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Our resolve is so good whenever we've just filled up on whatever that is. Yeah, great example.
Yeah.
So it's tricky for sure. But it seems like that the other part of this is this struggle to understand someone else's mental state if it's different than our own. And that's one that could lead to problems in our relationships.
Sure. And that one's called the interpersonal empathy gap. So when it comes to misjudging other people's perspective, the empathy gap could, for say, example, could cause somebody who feels safe to struggle to imagine the perspective of somebody who feels scared. You can start to see that there would be serious implications with this situation in the empathy gap. So the empathy gap gives us fits when it comes to really interpreting and even predicting people's behaviors. So it's important that we understand it.
So let's start by looking at why this happens. Research tells us that the main reason people experience empathy gaps is that human cognition is state dependent, meaning that our thought process is strongly affected by how we are feeling, which makes it difficult to think properly about other mental states or to predict the influence of different feelings.
Yeah, I think this one really explains a lot of the more confusing conflicts that we have with other people. I have a story of my own inability to empathize with a specific feeling of some loved ones, and this is a little bit of a long story, but I think it really fits in. So when I was a kid, my mom, whenever I would get ready to go outside or get ready to go somewhere, would always say things to me like, don't you want a hat for your ears? Or don't you want a scarf or something to cover your ears? Or even sometimes you need to put your hood up to cover your ears. And it never made sense to me. We always did battle about this. I hated having my ears covered, and it wasn't something that I needed to do. And I couldn't for the life of me figure out why it was that she thought I should cover my ears all the time. So what I did know was that she always kept her ears covered. And if it was kind of windy, she would complain about how it hurt her ears. And as kids are prone to do, I kind of just thought she was weird, mostly because it didn't apply to me. And I simply couldn't empathize with that. Okay, so then we flash forward many years, and now I've got a daughter who has the exact same complaint as my mom did. So when the wind blows, it makes her ears hurt. And she's talked about this since she was little. And of course, her and my mom would both always commiserate with one another about it, right? Yeah, like, oh, my ears hurt. Yeah, me too. And I completely believed them, but it was really still kind of hard for me to understand. So I bought my daughter lots of hoodies because it was always hard for me to remember to bring a hat or a scarf along for her because it just wasn't something that impacted me specifically. So just last week, I was walking on the beach with my daughter, who's been telling me about this ear thing for close to 30 years now. Well, it was warm, but it was really windy, and she didn't have anything to cover her ears. And as we were talking about it, she explained it to me in a way that really finally, after all these years, helped me to empathize. She said, Mom, what it feels like is when you're on a plane and you can't get your ears to pop to control the pressure. And I stopped in my tracks and I looked at her and really I saw this in a whole different light.
Yeah.
And I've certainly had that problem on a plane and I'll never forget how bad it hurts, right? So empathy gap bridge. She finally put it in a way that it like clicked for me and I could totally empathize with what it was she was feeling. And I get it now. I really just wish I would have understood it sooner.
Mhm. It goes back to the whole point of our podcast, I think, Dana, right? Is being able to see things through the eyes of another.
Or feel
Right.
things through the ears of another person.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah. I think so often with parenting, we all struggle to really empathize with our children. Right?
Yeah.
It's hard sometimes. So
Yeah.
this is a great segue into talking about our work with families. The experts tell us that we seem to project what we're feeling onto other people. And when we're feeling differently than our children, that can get us out of sync with them. I don't know if you can tell, but I'm really identifying with this, Dana, right? As a mom of a 14-year-old, I really understand this. And that's why, the Growing Great Kids supports parents with tools like e-parenting and getting in sync, because it's so very important that we are able, right, to understand and empathize with our children.
Yeah. Researchers have found evidence of a mismatch between what parents believe their kids are feeling and what children actually reported themselves that they were feeling. Parents who reported feeling lots of negative emotions were more likely to overestimate their children's distress. But most parents underestimated their children's
Mm.
anxieties and worries. If a parent felt good, they tended to assume that their kids felt good too.
Yeah, and this is so important. There's a big lesson that we can take from this research that's really relevant. Kids often experience the world in ways that are very different from adults. As parents, well, just as adults in general, really, we need to remember that when a child is having a meltdown, it can be challenging to empathize with what they're feeling, especially when we're not in that same emotional state that they're in. And so this empathy gap can really come into play if we're not intentional about overcoming it.
Yeah. So let's talk a little more about that intentionality. What kinds of things can we do to start to overcome this bias and behave more empathically, either with our children or with anyone, really?
Mhm. One thing we can do is to practice putting aside our own viewpoints. Often we don't realize how much our experiences and our beliefs are affecting how we perceive other people and their situation. We need to try to think about how we would feel about the situation, not only if it were happening to us, but also if we had a similar backstory to them. So slowing ourselves down a bit to put those things aside can help us focus on the person in front of us and help us tune in better to what's happening with them.
Yeah, slowing down. That one always
Yeah.
comes up when we talk about debiasing, doesn't it?
Hmm.
I think listening, really listening, is another strategy. So often when we're listening to people, we're already thinking about how we're going to respond to what they're saying.
Yeah. This is one of our favorite conversations that we have oftentimes, Dana, right? Is this listening to hear or listening to respond, right?
Yeah.
Where are
Yeah.
we? So when we do that, when we're listening to think about what we want to say, then we truly can hear what that other person is saying to us. And we often will miss those key pieces of information that could help us better understand the real feelings behind what they're saying.
Yeah, the feelings behind what they're saying, that's so important. Sometimes we have to focus less on the words and
Hmm.
more on the feelings that are motivating those words. And I think if we turn down the volume on our own voices and turn up the volume on other people's voice,
Hmm.
we'll be better able to respond with empathy.
Hmm. Curiosity can also be a helpful strategy. When we come from a place of curiosity about someone as they're sharing with us, we can become more engaged in their feelings. By asking them questions about their experiences, you're letting them know, most importantly, that you're really listening and that you want to understand. Those are such big pieces for us, right? It's to be heard and for people to understand us. And this goes back to that conversation we had sometimes that people want to feel seen and heard, and that's a great way to practice empathy.
Yeah. I think learning to ask and not assume is
Yeah.
a really a key skill to overcoming bias. I think assumptions can get us into all sorts of trouble.
Mhm.
It's really about getting past that and truly utilizing our cognitive empathy.
Mhm. Exactly. And what we know is that cognitive empathy works best when you have a genuine curiosity about how the other person views the world. Us being open to what it feels like to be in their shoes and genuinely having a tolerance for the fact that their perspective might be different than yours.
Yeah, yeah. I think genuine curiosity and genuine tolerance, a couple of things you said in there. And I totally agree. We can never assume that we understand the other person's perspective or their experiences. Even when we've been through something very similar, our feelings may not have been the same as what they're feeling. Everyone's
Mhm.
feelings are really unique to them.
Mhm. Another strategy is to that we try is let me say this differently. Another strategy that we can try is to consciously try not to fix the situation. I'm saying a lot there. Let
Yeah,
me
yeah,
try that
yeah,
again,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
It's this tendency that we have when we're around someone who's struggling that we want to jump in and fix it for them. And we do that especially with our children, right? But it's so important that we slow down and not rush to fix it.
Yeah, yeah. This is one I'm guilty of for sure. I think if we want to overcome the empathy gap, though, we've got to resist that temptation. We don't like to see people hurting, and often we try to make them laugh or cheer them up. Or for me, I'm always trying to help them look on the bright side, right? And my intentions are good, and all of our intentions are good when we do those things, but they can leave people feeling sort of unheard.
Mhm. Basically, it sounds like what we're describing with all of these strategies is the importance for us to really focus on enhancing our attunement skills. By knowing that we all struggle with an empathy gap, we can intentionally stay mindful for our own emotional state and how it can impact our ability to tune in and connect with another person.
Yeah, I think attunement really does sum it up quite well. Quality interaction with someone includes elements like mindfulness, presence, active listening, empathy, and
Mhm.
really cognitive understanding. So when all of those things are working together, that's when attunement really happens between people.
And when we overcome the empathy gap, we can give someone the gift of feeling really and truly understood.
And that really is the ultimate gift we can give one another. When somebody genuinely listens to you and understands the feelings behind your words, you feel seen and you feel heard. Most importantly, you feel loved and valued.
Mhm. Which connects beautifully to an important part of our Great Kids vision is that we live in a world where all children feel loved and valued.
Yeah, this discussion hopefully can get us a step closer, not just for all children to feel that, but for everyone, for all of us to feel loved and valued. Shauna, that seems like an excellent place to wrap
Yeah.
this one up.
Yeah. We're so grateful for everyone that's joining us as we continue these conversations and talk and think about cognitive biases that can plague us all, but also explore the different strategies that we can employ to help us overcome them.
Yeah, so we're going to keep talking about cognitive bias. We'll be back in a couple of weeks to explore another bias, and we hope you can join us again. If you've missed any of the episodes so far and you want to catch up, you can find them all on the resources page of our website, greatkidsinc.org. Take care, everybody. We'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Thanks.